as founders, we're all taking a risk. We all think we're building the next big thing, but the reality is we might not be. Like, that might not be what happens. And I think by sharing the journey, it's going to help the company you're building right now. It might help get you visibility for the next company you build, or it might help you get the other work that you need to get to continue building your dreams or getting yourself back on track. So I just think when you lead and share from an authentic place, you're not going to lose.
Hello, marginal listeners. So excited to have you back with us this week and to continue in the journey of 2025. A theme for me so far in 2025 is that every guest I've had on the show so far this year is a breathwork facilitator. So I don't know if that's any indication of the type of energy I'm trying to curate in my life right now. I really need folks in the personal wellness space, the mindfulness meditation space. I need them surrounding me. And I figured maybe that would be beneficial to our audiences as well. But all jokes aside, I do hope everybody's 2025 is off to a good start. Let's put 2024 in the rear view and let's tackle some big things for 2025, but also be really kind to ourselves this year. I think that's top of the list for me. With that, I'm so excited to sit down with this week's guest, Ryan Welti, yoga teacher, retreat host, and founder of RetreatVi, among other things. We chat about her journey in management consulting and her experience with corporate burnout twice, both of which led her to seek out more wellness practices in her life. Ryan shares how she laid the foundations for entrepreneurship early in her corporate career, which is super smart, doing things like prioritizing a good paycheck, treating every contact as a potential investor, and building a personal brand for herself outside of work. If you're interested in authentic entrepreneurship, personal wellness, and really making your career work for you rather than the other way around, definitely give this episode a listen. With that, I'm so grateful for everything that Ryan shared with us today, and I'm really excited to get into it. When I connected with you last, you were actually in New Jersey, correct?
Yes, yes. I was spending some time there. So this year, I left my full-time job to go all in on my startup. And a big part of that was ending my lease in San Diego and becoming a bit of like a digital nomad. So I was definitely staying with friends and family in New Jersey. And now I'm with friends and family in California. So very blessed to have people who have opened their homes to me and are feeling like supporting my journey at this time in this way. Cause it's a huge part of being able to take these risks is having that support.
Completely. And that was something we did connect on because when I first started our startup, I was living with my mother as well on the East Coast, and I had recently moved home from California. And the plan was always to settle with her for a bit until we found our next place. But just given kind of the trajectory of where my first startup was going, I needed a little more time to get my footing and find another secondary stream of income to bring in because we realized we weren't going to raise money in that time. And I got to live with my mom. And, a lot of folks think living with your in-laws or living with your parents at 30 years old, it might feel a little suffocating. And I'm sure for many folks that's the case, but I loved it. And I know my mom's going to listen to it. And I'm not just saying it because I have her captive ear, but I really cherished that time I had, especially as someone who was so incredibly career driven early in her adult life. I didn't spend a ton of time with family, at least not my free time because I didn't have much of it. So to kind of return to this kind of soft landing pad while I was getting my bearings financially, setting up the systems I needed to found my own company, it was really great to have that time with family and have that support system.
Totally. And I think even at times, like, this has been truly the most beautiful time I think me and my mom have had in a long time too. And we both felt very aware of that, which was extremely special. But I also just kept thinking about even in times where I was like, oh, I can't wait to have more stability in my life or have my own lease again or in the future own a home one day. And I just kept coming back to like, there's a future version of me who's looking back at this time, like with a lot of nostalgia and gratitude and like wishing I could kind of go back to that moment of like, it was really beautiful to be able to have dinner with my mom and my stepdad for so many nights in a row and like feel so supported and together.
And that's exactly how I look at it. I look back at it with the rosiest of
Oh, yeah.
glasses, and sometimes my husband's like, "Ab, like, that was, like, we're a married couple living with your mom," and he was so eternally grateful for it too, but I just yeah, I I look back on it so fondly. The funniest thing about it, and I think the biggest gripe my husband had, was that New England, we have very inclement weather, and the car we had was a California car that we had shipped to the East Coast, and my mom lives on top of a hill, and our California car could not make it up that hill
Oh
in
my
the New
God.
England winters. So,
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest strife we had living with my parents, but we can't fault them for that. That's just the elements.
It's just all part of it too.
Yeah.
It's like and now it's like a silly, funny story about the California car, and that's kind of how it all becomes. You get far enough away from it and everything has rose-colored glasses on it, which, like, if you think of that in real time, it's so helpful to be like, "One day I'm gonna be laughing about this moment," or "One day I'm gonna, like, be thinking so fondly about this moment."
It's so true, and it really applies to entrepreneurship as well. I mean, there's so many things that and we're gonna get into this with RetreatVi and you as well, but there's so many things that happen when you're an entrepreneur, and they can feel like abysmal failures or missed opportunities or, I don't know, just something not going your way, but it does have a way of, in retrospect, when you look back, thank goodness that that opportunity didn't materialize because then another better fit came right after it. That's not to say, I know hindsight's 2020, but it's good to keep that perspective because particularly as a founder, if something feels like it's a little too much of an uphill battle or it's a little too hard, I always like to say easy is best. Like, there are certain things that are for you when it comes to your business, and those things that just naturally feel like they're clicking into place, you should follow down that path because that probably means that you're speaking to the people you should be speaking to. You're appealing to the customers that are really great fit for your business, things like that.
I love that. Yeah, and I think there's also so much around following that alignment and understanding that, like, everything's gonna lead you to where you have to be and just kind of flowing with that too, and not being so stuck on, like, this has to happen for that because it's like, ultimately, there's no right and wrong choices, and it just leads us to, like, a new set of circumstances or opportunities or people to meet, and we just keep going from that space too.
Yeah. It's really funny though because we both have corporate backgrounds. Particularly in corporate, there is, like, standard operating procedures. There's a desired outcome, right? There's a right and a wrong way to do things, especially you with your consulting
Yeah.
background. So, I love to start to dive a little bit more into you know what? Let's go pre-career. Let's talk about Ryan growing up and then bring us on the journey of how you eventually got into your corporate career and then how you exited your corporate career.
Yeah, so I grew up in New Jersey, and I feel like I always had a job, like, I was always working and was just very aware of that as a path and was very aware of just different circumstances in life and felt like a lot of things were very out of my control. And I think that made me very aware of the decisions I was making today and how those would lead to tomorrow. So even with thinking around like college and like what to study at college, I actually chose finance, and I didn't see many people work in finance, but I knew a really successful person and their kids studied finance. So I just kind of was like, I'm going to take a page. No one's telling me to study this, but if I'm going to take this money to go to college and go on all loans, I need to get a return on my investment. I can picture the life I want to have. I don't want it to be centered around struggling. And I knew I wasn't gonna be able to go to more school, so I was like, "How can I get the most bang for my buck out of 4 years?" And so I landed on finance, and even in college, it never came easy to me. It was really challenging, literally up until graduating, but I never changed it. I remember I met with a not a guidance counselor, but I guess like a major counselor when you're in undergrad, and they were like, "Well, why don't you look into changing it?" Because I was like, "I really love marketing," and I was like, no, because I can't graduate into that salary band of, like, what that entry level position is. Like, I'm gonna have so many loans. I'm already overwhelmed by them. Like, I just need to this is what I need to graduate with. And it's interesting because I look back and I think there's certain things that have become really pronounced in entrepreneurship, and I'm like, "Wow, these are parts of me." And then I look back and I'm like, "That was always there." Now it's just like you're identifying more as that's part of your personality, like, that level of, like, grit or perseverance or commitment to the life you wanna have and really taking some risks along the way. Because even with finance, the risk was, "Okay, I'm getting this degree. My grades aren't great. My GPA isn't gonna walk me through any doors." And that actually came up in the interview for my first job that I ended up getting. The interviewer asked me because I was below the GPA requirement, but I had met them all in person at a career fair, so I was able to talk with them and have really good relationships. And when I got to the final round, the guy who interviewed me was like, "What happened with your GPA?" And I was like, and it wasn't terrible, like, it wasn't abysmal, but it just wasn't up to par, and I just kind of said, I was like, honestly, I could have changed it, and I could have gotten really great grades in something that came more natural, but I felt like this was gonna open more doors, and I was there to learn. I wasn't there to just get good grades and get out. And he loved it, like, which was the first sign that I was like, people love a story. He even said he wanted to talk to his daughter about it because she was getting ready to go to college. And he was like, that makes sense. And I think that's too, we get so stuck sometimes in like, well, I can do really well at something that comes natural or I can push myself. And I think there is a fine line of choosing because, like, I didn't stick with that. Like, obviously, I went into consulting. I didn't do anything finance related, but I still feel really grateful that that's what I graduated with a degree in. And then the big decision for going into consulting was I don't know what I want to do. This feels like a good way to get exposed to a lot of things. But the bigger thing was this feels like a good opportunity to get to travel on someone else's dime. What I would tell that version of myself now is like, that's not gonna be what it sounds like, the travel, but I still don't regret, like, leading with that desire to travel because I really did get to go to a lot of places and have a lot of different experiences, and I think when you travel for work, you grow at a different pace, than
Mhm.
your peers, just because there's different expectations of you, different expectations of executive presence, professionalism, handling things, sacrificing things.
Holding yourself accountable and yeah, I mean, early in my career, I traveled a lot internationally, actually,
Yeah.
and, like, even things around I mean, I didn't drink until, like, my mid-20s, but I had other colleagues I was traveling with who did drink, and, when you're traveling, you're going out with colleagues and stuff, and being able to keep your composure in those settings when you're drinking on the co not just traveling, but drinking on the company
Yeah.
dime, it forces you to grow up very quickly because you need to hold yourself accountable in a way you're not challenged in the same ways when you're not put in those settings.
It's so true. It's actually so funny that you say that because I mean, I definitely drank at like a much younger age in New Jersey, but one of the first round interviews for that company was because it was college campus. They took us out for like they had a tab, it was drinks, and a lot of people, I think, were a little too comfortable in that scenario and kind of blurring the line of like we are in our college bar at this kind of not interview, but everything is an opportunity to showcase who you are. And I remember I like left early and I was like, this was great. Thanks so much. But a lot of people stayed and just different experiences. But I always look at that. I'm like, I think I shined in that experience because it was like, this is not my moment to take advantage of the free drinks and have it
Right.
like this was my experience to have a drink with people that you're going to be interviewing with and then see yourself out and head on home.
Yep, leave before the party's over.
Yeah,
Yeah, always.
exactly.
Yeah, nothing good happens after, like, 10 p.m.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. I love kind of the foil you just presented too, because I was saying something about, easy is best, right? But then you also provided an example of how you also need to give yourself a shot at pursuing things that are difficult. It's not to say that you shouldn't actually try to motivate yourself or I guess even just put yourself in situations where you might not be the most competitive. I feel like that's a very grounding exercise, especially for us millennials. I don't know, Ryan, if you're technically a millennial,
I
but
think I'm like right on the edge.
okay, you're a young millennial. I'm gonna say I'm a young millennial, but not as young as you. And we are not good at doing things we're not good at. It makes us very uncomfortable because we like to be exceptional because we were raised to think that we were exceptional. And I was top of my class growing up, and I would have been very hard pressed to pursue a field where I wasn't top of my game because I was just used to occupying that space. There's really value to be had in challenging yourself in ways that you can get comfortable with not knowing everything, maybe not being twice exceptional. I think it's also a really humbling exercise as well and great for character development.
Totally, and that's really also how I feel like that came full circle for me because in college, it didn't feel like this exercise of, like, choosing, it felt more like, I have to do this, like, for, like, a financial perspective, but even doing yoga teacher training later in my 20s was this exercise of, you are very new at this, you are not the best in this group at this, and nothing of this is really coming super naturally to you, but this is an experience you wanna have, and you're gonna grow through this, and even if it looks different, there's something to be said about doing things because you enjoy them and not trying to be the best in the room. Like, I think that's like a really it allows you to grow in such a new way, and that's really where you also allow new opportunities for, like, creativity, experience, flow, play, all these different things that help you live a life that feels even better to you.
Yeah, completely. All right. So we talked about how you had moved into consulting. You thought you were going to be traveling the world on a company dime. You were probably traveling quite a bit, but it wasn't on par with expectations. So, what did you start to uncover about yourself and about the role when you got into consulting?
Yeah, I think within the first year, I just was looking around and even at my own, like I was gone every Monday through Thursday. I felt like I had one foot in the door in my life and one foot out the door, which was a very, I think the transition already is hard from college to real world. And then you add on having to go to Toledo, Ohio every week. And it was like, wow, this was really different than what I thought was going to happen to me. And I just started looking around and kind of paying attention to what was I enjoying? What was I not enjoying? I actually made like an inventory list. It was from a book, but around like, what am I enjoying in my life? What am I not? And I tried to move into a new team in my consulting firm. So I was like, okay, I want to be a little bit more people oriented. Right now, I feel like I'm only working on like, it was like SAP project management. So it was very tickets and moving things. Like it was not creative or strategic or really impact oriented, it felt like to me. And so then I moved to a different team and started doing more change management work, which really required me to learn a lot about self advocacy. Because if anyone's listening to consulting firms are, they might say you're the CEO of your own career. It's incredibly hard to steer that ship, depending like how early you are, who's on your side. And when you're only 1 year in, you don't have that much weight behind you to really make any moves. So I really had to continue to push that for myself. And when I joined change management, things started aligning a bit more for me. I was working with leadership in a more direct way. I was working on projects that were just exposing me to different aspects of business. And that was around the time too that I realized, okay, more than this, even I'd like to have my own company one day because I found a few truths of I'm never going to get what I'm giving. I feel like I put a lot into my work and I'm not feeling that come back to me in a sense of recognition, reward, money. Like, I don't think it's shameful to say, like, if you want to make a lot of money, I think that's a beautiful thing, especially for women to really say that and mean it. And I did want to make a lot of money. I still do. But at the time, I was like, I don't see how this is going to get me to the life that I dream of having. And I feel like I'm having to fight really hard to find work that feels meaningful to me. And I know I have so much to give. So this is not adding up. But I just kept trying to meet as many people as I could and get closer to something that felt good, which led me to moving from Atlanta to San Francisco and joining a new firm. I got a lot more product oriented there. I started doing more user research, product management, different strategies like roadmap development for firms, a lot of interviews, and like really dissecting out like what are the pain points for this organization? How do they move forward? Getting comfortable presenting findings and working with clients in a more direct manner as opposed to being more like you are here joining this team. It's like more relationship focused. And I just kept kind of coming back to this idea of like, I'd love to have my own business one day, but I don't know what that is right now. And the best thing I can do for myself in the meantime is pay off my student debt. That way I'm in a better position when the idea comes, but meet as many people as I can and try to learn as much about business and technology and problems and solutions as I can. So I did a lot of certifications around product management. I did some more technical ones, like I did a SQL one, and I was like, I don't really know where this is going to plug in, but people are talking about it in San Francisco, so I'm going to learn a little bit. And I think just being really curious and leading with a lot of gratitude and curiosity, like really trying to learn about people's careers and different things like that, which was incredibly fruitful.
Yeah, and I mean, that's ultimately what got you into consulting in the first place, right? Because you were like, "I don't like finance, but maybe if I try this consulting role, I'll be able to get exposure to other types of work that I
Totally.
like." And it's so smart the way you were thinking about it too, because you were honest with yourself about your financial situation, which I think will be a big theme throughout this conversation, and it's something that I think we should all have a firm grasp on, right? Like, if our financial needs necessitate us doing certain types of work before or while we're building other businesses, we need to stay true to that because you're never going to build a good business out of a place of lack, right? Like if you can't pay your bills, you're not going to be able to think strategically about your own company that you're building. So I love that that kind of was at the center even then. And I love too what you say about, and I don't know if this rings true for you, but I also had this problem where when I was working in corporate, I started to treat every company like it was my own. And I don't know, maybe you said in consulting, that was almost like something indoctrinated into you that they told you being a consultant is like being the CEO of your own career. I don't know, it wasn't necessarily that anybody told me that I should treat every company as though it was my own. That's just kind of how I'm programmed. And similarly, you burn out because what you start to realize is there is no way somebody else's company can give back to you what you give to it if it is not your own.
Yeah,
And you will try, and you will try, and it will always fall short of being able to reciprocate that value. I think it's something that is very top of mind for a lot of folks now, given the uncertain job climate within corporate. Folks have given so much of themselves to these corporate careers, and it's never a two-way street, actually.
yeah.
But I think it was so smart because you knew that you were destined to do something of your own, but in the meantime, you needed to build up the resources to make that a financial viability for yourself.
Totally, and I think it's also totally okay if you don't have your idea yet. Like, I think I used to feel so rushed because I would see all these, like, other people having their idea and really running with it, and I think as long as you're moving towards, like, the direction of your dreams, it's all gonna come together. Who knows? Maybe this next scenario that you're gonna be in is where you'll get your idea to run with too, but, yeah, I totally love what you said too, just about thinking of it as your own. I think my mindset was very, like, these could all be potential investors one day. So every work you do, sign off on it through the lens of like, I'm proud of this, not because of the company I'm representing, but because it's Ryan Welty. I worked on this. And like, I want you to think back and not even think about the company that you found me through when we started consulting together. But I want you to think of me and be like, Ryan was pivotal on this. What is she up to now? Like that was kind of always the lens I was thinking through, which led to putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I mean, I burnt out twice, took 2 leaves of absences. I did one in 2020 and one last year in 2023 for 4 weeks and for about 4 weeks as well. And I think burnout is so real and it's so hard to avoid. And you just have to learn through it each time and figure out how can you strike new balance and take care of yourself that much better? But I think it's a process that even when I look back on them, like even coming back to the rose-colored glasses, I look back on both of those with so much gratitude for myself because I grew so much through those times because you really have to pick yourself back up or you really have to accept help and support or speak up for yourself and what you need because the company's never going to come tapping on you and be like, you look like you need to leave. How are you feeling? Like, it's a hard conversation to open, but it's really empowering to do that for yourself.
Yeah. So twice you took leaves of absence while you were doing this consulting work.
Yeah, one at each company that I worked at.
Got it. And so I guess what did you do? I'm curious, what did you do during your leave of absence to kind of better equip you to go back to those environments? Or was that not a feasibility, which is why ultimately you ended up leaving corporate?
Yeah, I think the first one was a lot more dire. Like, I had a lot of physical, like, burnout, like, my hair was falling out, I was not sleeping well, I wasn't taking care of myself. So that leave looked a lot like letting my mom make meals. I was home for Christmas. I stayed home for the whole month, going on walks and kind of relaxing, trying to relax. It took 2 weeks, I feel like, for my body to calm down because at that point, and I'm really open about this, but at that point, leading up to that, I was crying every day, not because I was sad, not because I was overwhelmed. It was just like my body was so burnt out that it was like the wind could blow and I would be like, "Oh my god, I'm having a breakdown right now." And I think a lot of us felt that in 2022, especially I definitely went the route of, I'm gonna throw myself into work.
Yep.
That's what I can control. I'm gonna control that, and it totally took a turn. The second leave that I did last year was a little less intense, I would say, because I learned so much through the first one. But even that one, that looked like giving myself space to be creative, to draw, to I took like a ceramics class. I did a lot of hiking. I traveled a little bit, danced a lot when I traveled, just really coming back to myself and bringing back that sense of like creativity and openness versus the first one was much more like, let's just get out of fight or flight for a little bit.
Was that second sabbatical that you took or that second leave you took, was that when you were in Portugal?
Yeah, that was last year. Yeah. So I took like a 3 week travel with my best friend. And then I had a few weeks of just like unpaid. I'm just home. And I was also in San Diego living there at the time. So, I mean, talk about a better place to have like a mini sabbatical at. But yeah, I think traveling during that time was so pivotal. Like, I think travel can be such like a quantum leap opportunity as is, especially international. I think if you have the opportunity, find a way to make it work just because you'll get such a new sense of yourself. And I think for me, that time I look at it and I'm like, yeah, that was a time where I really stepped into like, I am going to work through my fear of being seen. I'm going to prioritize social media. I'm going to expand. And I feel like I came back from that trip a very new version of myself that allowed me to walk through the doors of this past year.
I know the same is true for me when it comes to travel. I have found at various points in my career that going places that makes your world feel very expansive. So for me, I feel like the essence of my anxiety is when my world is basically just my own head. When I get so myopic and the challenges and the difficulties I'm tasked with every day, that is like the sum of my daily experience, right? Like I'm just a prisoner of my own brain. And you truly are. Like that's not to diminish. You really are, like you said, you will have those physiological effects. Your hair will fall out, your body's keeping the score. Um, you're in immense pain. Like your body doesn't understand the difference between you doing your own ruminations and you being chased by a tiger. So there's been periods in my life where I've absolutely felt like a prisoner in my own brain, and travel really helps you acknowledge how small you are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research right now coming out around awe and how that can actually be a great thing to offset like depression and anxiety, because the second you can acknowledge how small and insignificant you are in the vastness of the world and the universe, it's a very grounding experience. And I think it gets you to it puts the challenges that you're having in a bit of perspective. So I always kind of think of ways of, because not it's not feasible for everybody to travel abroad every time they're having some of these existential crises, but how can we introduce moments of awe and this expansiveness when we're not traveling? And I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on that as a retreat leader. But, even something as simple as like being in nature, like going and looking at ginormous trees. I remember when I lived in the Bay Area, like seeing the redwoods sometimes would just be a super alleviating experience.
Yeah, and I love that. I need to look into that research about awe because it's so interesting. When I lived in Atlanta for like 3 years after I graduated college, and I kind of always knew like Atlanta wasn't gonna be my forever place, and I always knew I wanted to move to California, and when people would ask about it, I always came back to this sense of whenever I'm there, there's so much nature, it makes me feel small in a good way, and because usually we hear, "Oh, it made me feel small," and it's negative, but it's such a reminder that, like, this world is so big, it is so grand, it is so vast. You're okay, you're gonna be okay, and I feel like it is that, like, sense of awe.
Yeah, and the thing I also love too about traveling to other cultures is meeting people from other cultures too. I think particularly if you are raised in the capitalist system of the US and if you're in consulting or if you're in big tech, other parts of the world, people work differently. A lot of people are choosing a lifestyle, they're not choosing a job. And that is not the standard in the country we operate in. So I always love to travel and see, because it's funny because a lot of times I travel and we'll travel during the weekdays and you see people outside going on walks, going to cafes, meeting up with friends during the weekdays. And you think to yourself, well, these people have full-time jobs, but they're also taking rest and reprieve from those jobs, socially interacting. They're making time for hobbies. They have a life outside work, and life intersects work in all these really interesting ways, even when it's not your weekend. That was just one of the things I really picked up on when I traveled to Italy earlier this year. So yeah, all for the Portugal travel, all for these experiences of making you feel small in good ways and also connecting you to other versions of the human experience.
100%, and I think even, because I went back to Portugal this summer and I spent 2 months, and that was my first solo travel experience, and when I first was going, there were so many things that I was picking up on in the culture, and I was fighting it at first. I was like, "I need to start working, like, I need to do this, I" and after, like, a week and a half, I was like, "Okay, my feet are on the ground. I'm in Portugal. I'm having this experience. How can I just lean into like this and embrace it?" And it was so incredible because that allowed me to like romanticize my mornings, enjoy that, have a coffee and like a pastry outside before I start work and like find better balance. And coming back after those 2 months, I've already found myself dipping away from that and getting
Yeah.
back to like, wake up and hit the laptop and don't stop until it's done. And I'm trying to like consistently remember those lessons of slow down in an intentional way because we are supposed to enjoy our journey from here to there. Also, something I've been thinking about this week, especially, is when I think about the life that I want to live, which includes success for RetreatVi, all beautiful things on the way. I don't picture it being this life that is go, go, go. I picture it being a life that has a lot of alignment, a lot of flow, ease, slowness. I picture it being just a life that doesn't feel super rushed and heavy and hard. But that version of myself isn't going to just show up in 5 years. Like, I need to cultivate that life every day now and think through, like, okay, how can I not fight the ease or fight the slowness? How can I embrace it, cherish it a little bit because I want more of that? The reality is, I don't want less ease. I want more. But right now, I'm finding myself, if there is a moment of ease, I'm like, oh, I should be doing more, go harder. And it's like, okay, let's relax and come back to ourselves here.
Yeah, or you could do the thing I do where it is you will get to that point, but until you're at that point, you basically just need to run yourself ragged because now is like the opportunity for you to do that because you will be going through this life transition. And it's actually no, you need to practice this while things are busy. Actually, that's when you need it most. Um,
100%.
you're not just going to slow down when work slows down. You need to slow down when work is busy so you can continue to do the work for longer.
Yeah.
So I can completely empathize with that. I'm very curious to understand how retreats became such a big part of your life. Were you doing them when you were in corporate? How did you first get introduced to them?
So I had been doing yoga since like I first graduated from college, but I was doing much more like hot yoga, intense. Like, I look back on it now and I'm like, you couldn't pay me to go to a class like that at this point. But at the time, that was kind of my first introduction. And then I got really into fitness and just kind of paying more attention to the mind body connection and things that correlated for me and made an impact. And when I moved to California, that was kind of where everything got brought up a notch, as you could imagine, just the wellness experiences that exist out here that just are not as available on the East Coast. And I just kind of started dipping my toe in and going to different workshops and events. And I remember one time I actually posted on like an Instagram story, like, I would love to go on a retreat. Does anyone know of any? Because I was like, everything online is $7,000. Go to Thailand for a week. And I was like, not where I'm at, but that looks great. And I had like 20 women respond, being like, I don't know either, but let me know. So it just kind of was interesting, but it wasn't anything I clocked as that's your business idea. And then there was another time where I was just in my home, like creating nice space, lighting candles. And my roommate at the time had mentioned, she was like, I wish you always beat me home because I love coming home when you've already been home because it's so nice. And I was like, how do I make that a career? And I remember I dismissed it because I was like, that's not a career. Back to consulting, like, put your head down and get back to work. And then I look back at these things and I'm like, they really do all come together. I moved to San Diego and I decided to do yoga teacher training, which I always wanted to do. And it kind of was at this point where I felt like, okay, every year you've said you wanted to do this, and it either hasn't made sense financially or time wise, because it is 200 hours. But at this moment, I just mentally was like, you either do it now or you stop talking about it because you can't keep saying, oh, I'm going to do that one day. Like, you need to do it or not. So I did it. And I just kind of went into it being like, I want to deepen my practice. I want to make new friends. I want to have this experience. I want to be a more vulnerable version of myself. I think my life is going to require that of me in a lot of ways. But I wasn't even thinking like, and I'm going to host retreats. Like, it was kind of, it seemed a bit far off. And about halfway through, I was flying to a friend's wedding and I do a lot of journaling, a lot of best case scenario for my life.
Mhm.
And I started writing about these retreats that I would host because I was like, that feel is starting to feel more aligned as I'm going through this training. And I just halfway through the page started writing like, wait a minute, ClassPass, but for retreats. And from there, it was everything just started like, it was like a download of information. I started drawing on the plane. I was writing out, how do you monetize? What are the features? Who is this for? What does it look like? And it was so interesting because at the time, I think that was right before I turned 27. But earlier in my 20s, I always would, and even in college, I would think about like a business idea and write it down. And about 2 minutes after getting it, I'd always be like, it's a nice idea, but that's not a business. That's not what you're going to leave your life and your job to go do because it has to make sense. You have to really see it being the next big thing to take a big leap and take a risk like that. And so I just started thinking about it. And this was the first time that I was like, wait a minute, this does make sense. Like, this feels the like juice is worth the squeeze here. And so when I got back, I like tried to set up the LLC immediately and was like, let's move it forward.
I love it, and I remember you posting about this on TikTok about you always having these business ideas, and I think that is such a great point because not everybody should work on every idea, and we're seeing now more and more, like, founder market fit is so important, and certain people should be building certain businesses, and this is the perfect business for you to build because you are your ideal customer profile, like, you are the person that was looking for that retreat class pass. So you have that embodied experience of a customer alongside all of the other qualifications you have. You have product experience, things like that. But there's something that is so um, irreplaceable about having an embodied experience of the customer and being deeply attuned to why this makes sense for them.
No, I totally agree. And I think it's so interesting. And even kind of coming back to what we were saying at the beginning of trusting your timeline too and not getting caught up in things happening. The first, because I got this idea last spring. And I remember like this time last year, I just kept thinking, like, I just need to be able to launch it by the end of, by, as if by like January 1st, I could do it in 5 weeks. I was like, that's just what I need to do. And I had these really unrealistic and rigid ideas of what success, like what could be successful. But had that happened, I would have launched before I started hosting retreats, which from an outside perspective, there probably would have been a little bit of a disconnect for people. It wouldn't have built the story as organically, but I would have been missing out on a whole half of my customer base that I wouldn't have understood their experiences. And now I hosted my first retreat in June. We were supposed to host our second this weekend, but learned a lot about weather and terms and conditions and figuring it out. But in having those experiences to also do further competitive research through that lens of like, I am a customer as well as the founder of RetreatVi, and really infusing that into our designs and our processes and how I show up, because as a founder, you wear all the hats. So as I show up as customer success, customer service, marketing, it really like brought such richness to that if I had launched in the timeline that felt good to me initially, we would have missed all of this. That is it a detour? I don't think so. I think it's just how it was meant to happen.
I know. Again, I'm not someone who's like, "Oh, everything happens for a reason," but I do think in entrepreneurship, it really sometimes does. I mean, I can relate to, we had a completely different startup, my co-founder and I before. And then we both got to the financial situation where I'd already been doing other work. He needed to take on other work. And when that first happened, it was a big bummer. We were like, oh no, are we now both less committed to this startup because we're doing other fractional roles? And what came of that was the idea for a new product for people with portfolio careers. Had my co-founder not taken on his additional job, in addition to me having a side gig, we would have never had this new problem statement that we wanted to solve for us. So I completely resonate with that. There's certain things or inconveniences in your business or perceived failures, but then you look down the line and you're like, no, thank goodness this did happen or did not happen. Um,
100%.
and so just to clarify, so with RetreatVi, you now it's ClassPass for retreats, but you have a customer base both of folks looking for retreats and retreat hosts. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was really inspired by like Airbnb and ClassPass just in terms of I really feel like they disrupted markets and they brought a lot more exposure to different aspects of travel, holistic health, and just like shaking up how consumers behave when you think about like how we used to make travel decisions or workouts. And I was very inspired by that and their actual designs. And from there, kind of started working on RetreatVi designing. And so basically you can list a retreat to be listed so people can book. And then you can also go on and say, I'm looking for a retreat in July of 2025, less than $2,000. I want there to be breathwork and yoga. And then you'll see your options. So there's lots of ideas too for down the road around how to continue building this, expanding it, delivering value. But for the MVP, we kept it quite simple, which if you're listening to this and building something, I can't recommend that enough, going simple for that first launch. Because also people are new to your product and they might not know how to use everything if you overwhelm them with too many features. So we've kept it quite simple, but very excited to kind of share more things as we grow.
Yeah, that is so exciting. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you've done all of this without a technical co-founder, correct? Are you doing this alone?
Yeah, so I'm a solo founder, non-technical, even though now I'm like, I feel like I know a lot, but I'm still not a technical founder whatsoever. So I've worked with contractors for designs and then for development who I've gotten, or I've just worked with really incredible people on those things. So we've been able to create like a really amazing product so far.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, because I know this is a number one thing, particularly for female founders. If they're not technical, they feel like they need to bring on these crazy dev agencies that quote them huge sums of money, or they need to bring on a technical co founder day one and give up a large portion of equity in their company. And there's actually ways of, especially with an MVP, that's what it is. It is like the minimum requisite thing you need to deliver to help people see where you're trying to go and and start that value exchange. You don't need a lot. And I've always been spoiled because I co-founded my company with a technical co-founder, but I've spoken to so many women who have found other ways of putting together a prototype using no code tools, things like that, working with, very fortunate to have worked with really great contractors to help you realize that vision. It's not going to be the way it's gonna look moving forward, but it just has to be enough to help people conceptualize what the user experience is gonna be and the value exchange that's gonna happen.
Absolutely. And I think just to get something out there soon and start building, I think a lot of people talk about like launch early and it's not only for your products, but it's for your brand. Like to start getting people talking about what you're building and build that momentum. And you can do that on and off the app, but there's something to be said about launching something not too far after you've been telling people about it too. Because I announced RetreatVi on social media in April when I left my full time job. And then we launched in September, which felt like so long in between. But in the grand scheme, I look at that now and I'm like, that was quick because we didn't have developers until June.
And to that point too about that public accountability piece, like talking about it also means that you're holding yourself accountable to doing it. I mean, I know with a lot of your content, I mean, just being thoroughly transparent, which you always are, there's weeks where you kind of contemplate, is this the thing I should be doing anymore? But if you put it out there, it does hold you to the standard of it's a good way to remind yourself why you set out to do this in the first place. And if there is no digital footprint of that or footprint of that at all, it could be easier to dismiss it.
Totally. And I think there's such a flywheel effect of people knowing what you're working on and so many even silent followers who aren't maybe commenting and liking, but they're rooting for you. And like that matters. People talking about what you're doing matters. And I think taking them along for the journey that way, if you do find yourself at a position where you are needing support, whether that is your fundraising or maybe need more technical, like I have this specific question or I'm looking for this very specific connection or whatever it may be, people already kind of have been following along to know like where you're at and what it's going with. And it only continues to build your personal brand. And I think too, as founders, we're all taking a risk. We all think we're building the next big thing, but the reality is we might not be. Like that might not be what happens. And I think by sharing the journey, you definitely have to remove your ego from it and get used to being seen. But it's going to help the company you're building right now. It might help get you visibility for the next company you build, or it might help you get the other work that you need to get to continue building your dreams or getting yourself back on track whenever that time comes too. So I just think when you lead and share from an authentic place and are just trying to be vulnerable in a real way and not just for the sake of it, but really sharing your learnings and takeaways in your journey, you're not going to lose.
That's the thing. Yeah, there's no downside to it. Because I bring founders on this podcast, and it's funny, there's certain things that I understand they don't wanna share, particularly from, like, a fundraising perspective, but I think at the same time, if a certain investor doesn't wanna invest in your business because you're being the most transparent, authentic version of yourself, you're basically entering into a marriage, a very high stakes relationship with that person where you're gonna have to answer to them, and I don't know. Do you wanna sign on to a partnership where you can't embrace all the facets of your founder journey? I do think it is over glamorized what it means to be a founder. And I even like these day in the life videos on social of founders. I mean, I know what people are doing opportunistically. They're picking up their phones on the nights that they have events, that they have business travel. Do you know what the majority of like my day looks like as a founder? I'm sitting in front of the computer. I'm talking to customers. That's actually the majority of what I'm doing. And it's not this overly sensationalized thing, and that's why I was so drawn to TikTok because I started to see a little bit more of that guys coming down, that kind of veil of what it means to be like capital F female founder, and then what it means to be an actual female founder that's struggling with things like the daily, like, volatile emotions of what it means to be a founder, feeling like you don't resonate with other like, your why doesn't resonate with other people in your life, having financial insecurity, things like that. I mean, there's a lot of people who think that, like you said, you don't get into starting a company for the money. In the long term, yes, it might materialize, but in the very beginning, that's not the case. I just feel like so much of the rhetoric on social is it's really setting folks up for failure because what it's going to do is it's going to compel folks to get into starting their own companies, and they're going to be sorely, sorely disappointed once they do.
I think that's a great call, and I think even, like, that's part I've enjoyed on TikTok is, like, being vulnerable and, like, creating connections through that because it isn't glamorous. Most times it's not. There might be moments that feel that way or feel really exciting, but the bulk of this is it's really hard and there's a lot of unknowns, and every day you're figuring it out, and there's more unknowns than there are knowns, and the pendulum swing from, like, despair to celebration is very quick, very short-lived. Also, the reality is, like, the low lows linger a lot longer than the high highs. You'll wake up the next day and be like, "Okay, back to work." Like, great news was great yesterday, but if something bad happens, you might be shaking that off for a full week, maybe 2 weeks. Depending what it is, it might really sit with you.
It's so true. Our negativity bias, just as like a human race, is so crazy, and I feel like it's so pronounced as a founder. Do you have any advice for folks now that you've kind of cycled through these emotions and you're so self-aware? That's the thing. It's one thing to acknowledge that this happens, and then it's another thing to not succumb to these emotional cycles. Is there anything that you do to not getting into these bouts of deep, deep sadness or anxiety when something doesn't go according to plan?
I think the biggest thing that has been like a huge journey in my personal life over the last year is allowing yourself to feel the feelings without necessarily claiming them. Like it's normal to have a reaction. It's normal to be disappointed or feel like you need to cry. Those are normal reactions. And I feel like where it gets tricky is when we start attaching like narratives and are like, I'm never going to be successful because I had one failure. Like I am a failure versus I had a failure. I think just accepting the emotions and trying to really feel them that way when it's done and you're done crying, you can really move forward as opposed to if you hold it in all day, it's going to be right there under the surface. Can you just take 30 minutes for yourself right now and really let yourself feel like the full extent of that fear, of that doubt, of that disappointment? And I think having like a really strong practice as well for wellness. I see a lot of founders don't talk about mindset. And I think it's a huge part of the entrepreneurial journey. And just when you don't talk about it, you're kind of dismissing it. And that's like the game changer is when you can have those practices to lean on around meditation and movement or cold plunging or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I can totally and a lot of what you talked about too is just mindfulness, right? Like even if you're not someone who hosts wellness retreats, just being able to have the emotions kind of run through you, know that they're transient, know that the sooner you feel them, the sooner you can kind of let them go and it's not going to end up being your identity. I think that's the thing a lot of us have a hard time with. We have this like permanence where we think, "Oh, if I let myself feel this, I'm going to be feeling this forever and I'm going to get totally derailed." So to know that you can kind of have this move through you is so, so powerful. Um, Ryan, this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing everything you did with our audiences. Before I let you go, if folks want to learn a little bit more about RetreatVi, how to get in touch or involved, what's the best way of going about doing that?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. They should follow at RetreatVi on Instagram or go to www.retreatv.com and join our email list. That is always where we're sharing all the good stuff first and foremost.
Fabulous. We will include those details in the episode show notes should anybody want to get in touch. And Ryan, thank you again for this conversation. I'm coming away feeling very grounded and so excited to see what you're going to build and continue following along on your journey on social.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Marginal Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the team at CalPal with music by Siddhartha. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can view full episode show notes at marginalpodcast.com and follow us at Marginal Podcast on Instagram. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.